Okay, so at the end of the last video, I told you I'd show you how to break this text apart. So this is one word contained in a text box. What you do is select it, you go to Modify, and you go to Break Apart. Now things don't look much different, so one more time, we're gonna go Modify, Break Apart, and now you can see that we have each letter is broken apart. And that's probably enough for what you need to do here, but just so you know for the future, if you needed this to become a shape, like to the point where you could actually take the eraser tool and erase into it, like we're here, you can't, looks like you can, but you can't, just messing with you. Then what you'd have to do is break it down one step further, modify, break apart, and now it looks like a shape, and now you could actually erase that. So I'm going to Command Z back a couple steps to where it is like that. And then now, if you plan on animating these individually, you probably want to use that very handy feature inside of Flash, which is distributing these to layers. So I'll grab each one. I will do a modify timeline, distribute to layers, and now each one of those is on a layer by itself. And what's nice is because it was text, it did a nice job of naming these for us. Now they are still not symbols. So if I click on this, it still tells me that it's static text. It's just one piece of static text broken apart. So I would have to, one at a time, convert each one of these to a symbol. So F8, and I'll probably give it a name like, start them all out with C, but maybe I'll do underscore cap since there's a lowercase c here. We're going to use graphics, click OK, and then now you can do whatever it is that you want to do. Important things to mention here is I'd go as far as to say never animate two different objects on the same layer. Basically, don't ever do that. And that's why we use that command to break these apart. The other thing I want to emphasize, I've said it a couple times, you have complete creativity over what you do here. The only requirement I have is that you have the word classic and you have the word tweening. I believe it was tween or tweening, classic tweening. But if you want to bring in other elements, that's completely up to you. Like if you're gung-ho to be a character animator and you've already done some of it, and based on what you learned in the second section of here, you think you could make a character come in and point to the letters or something like that, have at it. In fact, here's something for you to see if you could figure out how to do this. Let's say, for example, we wanted this C to form in two pieces. We wanted part of the C to come in from above, so it to exist outside of the stage up here, and the bottom part of it to exist outside the stage below, and them to come together and form the C. So in other words, from where I have the mouse up would be one part of the C, and from where I have the mouse down would be a second part of the C. So go ahead and pause now, see if you can figure out how to do that, give it a try, because I'm about to show you a solution for it. So there's two important concepts at play here. One is that we have to be able to break this C apart. The other is once we have the ability to break it apart, we need to move part of it down here, part of it up here, and have them come together. But here's a big problem and a big thing to always keep this in mind. If you can animate backwards, do. Because the problem is if you separate this into two pieces, move it apart, are you going to know exactly where to put it back together? Are you going to be able to find the precise baseline for the bottom of the C? Are you going to know that you're not overlapping by 1 pixel? And in typography, that's extremely important. There are many of us typography freaks out there that notice little variations in typography. So work backwards. Okay, so our first step then is going to be to select this, to break it apart. Now that it's broken apart, we can do our magic. So this is going to be our finishing state of the animation, and we're on this layer right here. The first thing I'm going to do is select away and then draw out a marquee selection, and then I'm going to do an F8 and convert that to, and I'll just call this lower underscore C. Now the rest of the C, in fact, let's do something tricky here. We want to get this onto a new layer. I'm worried about trying to make this selection and accidentally selecting this symbol too. So what I'm going to do is select the symbol. I'm going to go to Modify, Timeline, Distribute to Layers, and then I now have lower C, and it named it the name of the symbol, so that's pretty handy for us. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock this. In fact, I'm even going to turn this part off as well, so it makes it very easy to now select this. Then I can F8. I can call this something like upper underscore C. Now I have my two pieces. They're on two different layers. Now I just need to make the animation going backwards and reverse it. So I'll unlock this layer, turn it back on, and let's say we wanted all this to happen like a second and a half later. So I'll go up to frame 30, drag across both of those layers, do an F6, and then, whoops, gotta make sure I only have one piece selected at a time here. Gonna move this up. I'll hold the shift key to constrain its proportions to right up. I'll do a command minus here so I can see a little bit more of the stage. Then I'll click on this part again, making sure that I'm on the 30th frame. I'll drag down, holding down the shift key to constrain its proportions. I'll drag across both of these frames, do a right click, select classic tween. So there's my animation the way it is now, but to reverse it, all I have to do is click, shift click, control click, or right click, and select reverse frames, and I now have an animation that from the start, that C doesn't even exist inside of our, in fact, let's preview this, and we can see they come together. And if I go up to my controls and I rewind, we can see at the very start of our animation that's nowhere, the C parts are nowhere to be found because they are off the stage. And if I control and play it, there they are coming together. Before I conclude with this video and leave you to your imagination here, I think it might not be a bad idea just for me to step through my animation that I did here, just so you can kind of see what I did. This may give you some inspiration or maybe answer some questions that you might have floating around in your head. So basically my intro, you can see that there's nothing here visually, although it looks like there's a ton of stuff here. Well, the truth of the matter is there is a lot of stuff here, and if I go to this cover and I turn it off by toggling the eyeball, you can see, yep, there's all my letters that make up the word classic. When I turn this back on, it's covered. So how did I do that? Well, what I did here is I created a piece, another symbol. And if you go to my library, there it is. I named it cover, and I'll do command minus a few times to make my stage smaller, and I'll draw out an instance of this cover. It just happens to be a solid, I first just made a rectangular shape and then converted it to a symbol. But once it's a symbol, I can make it any shape I want. And since it's the exact same color as my stage, then it's perfect because I can make it any size to cover up any text or any items on there. So that's a very quick way to do a fade in and a fade out rather than fading each individual letter in and out, which would take a lot more time. Here I'd have to do it for every letter that makes up the word classic. This way I only have to do it one time. So I'll delete that since I don't need it. And then let's see what else happens here. So we know all these letters are sitting here. We just can't see them because this thing is sitting on top of them, and then by the time we get here, this starts to tween from completely invisible. In other words, the alpha is 0, or I'm sorry, actually the alpha is a 100%, and it tweens down to 0 alpha. It's still sitting here, we just can't see it. And then my individual, and let me make this a little bigger, my individual entities start happening here. So the first thing that happens is this C animates from its normal size up to much bigger. So that's what's happening here. And then I just simply copied this frame over to here to make it go smaller. And to keep it interesting looking, rather than just have that go back and then the L come out, I actually overlapped the animation so the L starts here. And it just basically does exactly what the C did. And then before too long, the A starts to come out. That's what's happening here. And then we have this overlap here where the S starts to come into play. And you can see there's quite a bit of overlap as far as the animation's concerned there. And then before long, the S comes into play, which is down here. The I comes out very quickly, and quickly means shorter distance between keyframes. And then the C comes out. And the C has a rotation that takes place right on this last frame. So all I did was click somewhere between the first last keyframes, and on the properties I did a rotation, in this case counterclockwise. And then the word tween just blasts in there from nowhere. I could have put an opacity on it, which might have, gave it a little bit more finesse. And then we go to a fade out, which is this cover showing up again. And there it is. If I select it, you can see its alpha is 0, and then just simply goes back up to 100% so that it's covering everything. And then I have just a second of nothing, and then my regular animation starts. So when you get to this point that you've completed your animation, first of all, just keep your eye on the time as you're doing it. You have 8 to 12 seconds, so that's 8 times 20 is 160. So somewhere between 160 and 240 frames, you want yours to be, and I would make it fade out. You don't want to just make it go all of a sudden like from here, full brightness into an animation. That's gonna, or to a different animation. That's gonna look a little bit odd. So fading out, or everything flying off the stage, or whatever you come up with, would definitely look much more like you're in control than all of a sudden going from one thing and another thing just showing up. Another thing to be aware of when you're doing this animation style, when you're inserting frames, in other words, we made the second half of the animation, now we're doing the intro, is every now and then take a look over here where you expect your first 2 keyframes to be, and make sure they're not shifting on you. And here's an example of how they could shift. Well, first of all, let me just say that if you're careful and you don't work on these 2 frames that contain the whole entire second part of the animation, you should be fine. But every now and then you may say, oh, I have to do something here, like in a different animation on one of these. And let me just give you an example. What we'll do is I'll create a blank keyframe here, and I'll just say that I want this capital C to maybe give us a dose of double vision here, and then move off the stage. So that in itself is fine. If we go out to frame 240, that didn't cause us any problems. However, if we go back to the beginning and we say we want to extend it, make it longer, and we do what we probably normally would do, and that is do some F5s in here to extend that out, and then we go to frame 240, we can see that that series of F5s pushed this out. What you do is fix that and then go back to the beginning, and instead of using your F5 to elongate the animation, you would just click and drag the frame out, has the same exact effect.